In this video, we will talk about biases in sampling. So we've already talked about how there's some sampling methods that are flawed and will create bias, right? We said that the convenience method creates bias, especially a voluntary response survey. So we'll just talk about some more biases that could occur. So ultimately what a bias is if the result, so we say that if the results of a sample are not representative of the population, then a sample has a bias. Because remember, the whole point of statistics is to take a little sample and to make conclusions from that sample based off the population. So we need our sample to look like a mini version of the population, right? If we have too many of one type of person, it's not going to be as bestly represented as it should be. So there are more or less three biases that we'll talk about. First one is a sampling bias. So sampling bias means that the technique used to obtain the individuals to be in the sample tends to favor one part of the population over another. So this specifically is that convenience method that we were talking about, right? If you're just going to do the easiest way, you're going to be favoring one part over the other. It could be if you are picking the people, just the friendliest people, then only friendly people are going to be favored, right? If you are sending out mailers and it's only the people who send them back, well, there's only the type of people who send them back, right? Sampling bias also tends to results due to undercoverage, which occurs when the proportion of one segment of the population is lower in a sample than it is in the population. This could result if the frame used to obtain the sample is incorrect or not representative of the population. So, things that actually occur. So science has a really bad problem with this. Historically, any sort of ethnicity. So, Black Americans, women, Asian Americans, right? All these types of people, a lot of times when it comes to historically researching like medical treatments or anything like that, these populations tend to be underutilized and undercovered. So there tends to be a lot more white males than there are any other types of people. And of course, since men are even just half, right? We should have also half women, and it's not all white people, right? We have other types of minorities as well. And so if you're only talking about white people, you're going to be missing a lot of these other types of people, and you're not going to know how your medicine might affect a different ethnicity, or your medicine, or if you're asking about like a type of survey, right? You're not going to get these other ethnicities or women their ideas and their thoughts, which obviously would not mean that you're getting the thoughts of the population. You're only getting a favored one, right? All right. The next two. The first one is non-response bias. So non-response bias exists when individuals selected to be in the sample who do not respond. Makes pretty much sense, right? It's exactly what it says. So non-response is when people do not respond to the survey. If it doesn't say that people didn't respond, then we assume they did, right? So the only reason why we would say non-response is because people did not respond. You can't assume that people didn't respond. And then the last one is the response bias. So the response bias is a little more extensive than the other two. So this exists only when the answers on the survey do not reflect the true feelings of the respondent. So this could be a number of reasons. It could be that the type of question, right? It could be a leading question. In one way, you could say, do you think that we should give money to education? That is a simple, good question. And the other type of leading question that you could say is, should we give money to education so that our kids don't become homeless, prostitutes, drug-ridden, drug addicts? So should we give money so that doesn't happen? Well, that's a very leading question, right? You're implying one and causes the other. So people who might think that money should go to other stuff, right, like to the military or to hospitals or medicine, are probably going to say that in that scenario, yes, we should give money to education, even though that's not how they really feel. So we could be talking about leading questions. It could also be just the order of questions. And this one you can't really help, but it might actually have a response bias. A lot of times people remember either the first thing, if it's one or the other, or if there's a list of multiple things, people really remember the first and the last ones that you say. So if there's only two, a lot of times people will answer the first one rather than the second one, more times than not. And if it's a list of multiple things, people typically only remember the first thing you said and the last thing you said. So again, they may be answering one of these biased places instead of what they actually feel. And you can't really help that, but kind of thinking about that, you might mix up the questions every time you ask someone something. It could also just be asking an uncomfortable question. If you ask a question that people aren't going to answer, then it's not the true feelings of how people are, right? All right, so let's look at this problem, and this is it. This is all we're going to do for this video. So for this, we want to check the biases. So which of these three biases are these problems, and how would we fix it? So first one, the satisfaction survey asks the respondent to indicate whether she is satisfied, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. So which one of the three is this? Or which one of the three is this not? So it doesn't say that she didn't respond, right? So it's not the non-response. We assume that she would respond. It doesn't really tell us how they got their people, right? It's just talking about in one case, a female was asked. But it doesn't tell us how they chose her, so this really shouldn't deal with sampling. So the only thing left is the response bias. And why might this be a response bias? So remember, response bias says that it does not reflect the true feelings of the respondent. So how might not this reflect the true feelings of the respondent? Well, if we notice, there's one positive case, right, satisfied, and there's two negative cases, dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. So because of the way the question was asked, there may be more outcomes where someone would think that there's where there's negative choices as opposed to positive choices. So a way to fix this, right, at the very least, if you have a very dissatisfied, you should include a very satisfied. And some students also notice that there's no option for a neutral thing. So maybe also include a neutral reaction, right? Like an indifferent or don't care or something like that. Yeah, that would be way more biased or way more unbiased. All right, next. Number two people go door to door polling who people will be voting for in the next upcoming election, which resulted in 473 voting Democrat, 428 voting Republican, 39 voting independent, and 12 not opening the door. So which of the three are we going to have a bias for? So this time it said that there were 12 people who did not open the door. So that would be a non-response bias, right? It told us there were 12 people who didn't respond. So how could we fix it? So we don't want to choose 12 other people because we still will have these 12 people who don't respond. So ideally, you would need to fix this by getting these 12 people to respond. So one way you could do it is just go back again. Right? Go back a different day and hope that they open the door. Now, again, you can't force anybody to do anything, but the more times you can do it, or the more, maybe your persistence will get them to answer your survey. Another thing that our book says that I don't think is super great is that you could offer some sort of reward for answering. I'm not a huge fan of this. It does feel a little bit like, bribery. They also it might change the way that they think, right? So, for instance, a lot of times classes will have, what's it called? They'll have evaluations, right? Class evaluations where you will evaluate the professor. And there are some classes and some professors that will give like an extra point on a final exam if 100% of people participate on that evaluation. Hint, I don't do this, and I'm about to explain why. So where this might be great, because you might get 100% participation, if you're offering a reward for an evaluation for a class, I mean, you might get a lot more positive responses than you should be getting, right? You could simply be someone who super doesn't care, but you definitely want your extra point, so you want to make sure that you participate somehow. And so you're just like, sure, this professor's perfect. And they give them all good reviews, even if they don't deserve it, right? If I'm a terrible teacher, I don't want all my students to give me positive reviews just because I said I'd give them an extra point, right? I want to know, okay, how can I better myself as a teacher? So rewards, it's not super great, but our homework does give it as an option sometimes. So I just wanted to make us aware that technically could be something, even though it is not the best way of doing it. Yeah, just going back and trying again is probably the best way of doing it. Or maybe calling them. Or, I mean, by this point, just like giving them more options of responding. So that could be like actually doing a mailer. Like dropping it in the mail, saying you can come pick it up later if you want, if they don't have to talk to you or anything. That's okay because you're going to stay on top of them, right? So it's not a convenience way. You're still going to be the one to pick it up. You're still going to be the one who's making sure these 12 people try to answer it. You could call them on the phone. Some people would rather talk on the phone than in person. So maybe giving them other options as well might be a good way of doing it. Part 3. Literary Digest conducted a voter survey by asking its readers to mail in who they believed would win in the 1936 presidential election, and from their results, predicted that Alfred Landon would beat out FDR. So, which one of these biases would it be? So some students would say, oh, it's a voter survey, so probably some people didn't do a mail-in vote, right? The voter survey was by mail, so probably they didn't mail it back. But did it tell us that there were people who didn't mail it back? No, so we can't assume that people didn't mail back. Arguably, every single person mailed it back. So it's not going to be the non-response because it didn't tell us that people didn't respond. Now, probably there were at least one person who didn't respond, but since they didn't tell us that is not the bias here. The actual bias would be what? The sampling, right? Yeah, it's a sampling bias because what kind of sampling method is this? I mean, if you thought non-bias, you're probably getting at what the problem was. You just did a different bias, right? The problem here is what kind of method are we doing? Sampling method. So this is a convenience sampling method, right? And remember, we said this one was the terrible one. It's super flawed. So how can we fix it? So some people would say, oh, we'd want to mail to people other than Reader's Digest. And again, if we mail, we're still getting a convenience method. That's still going to cause a sampling error. So that's still not going to be great. So ultimately, we just need to choose a different sampling method. Right? We got 4 to choose from. We could do the simple random, where we put names in a hat or get a computer to randomly generate some names. We could do the stratified, right? Break people into groups and then take a lot of people from each group. You do the cluster, where every single person is put in a group and you just take all of the people in some of the groups. Or the systematic approach, right? Every 3 people, you get a long list of people's names, and you just call every 3rd person or 15th person or 23rd person, something like that. Just choose a different sampling method. That's going to be the best way to fix this. All right, last one. A survey asks whether the subject has killed anybody. So, again, if we're looking at this, don't overthink it. Did it tell us that this person didn't respond? No, so don't assume it, right? It didn't say that people didn't respond. So, there you go, non-response. So we're not looking at a non-response, right? We can't just assume that this person isn't going to respond to this question. Also, did it tell us how they got their sample? No, again, it just said they are asking one person a question if they've ever killed someone. So sampling isn't what we're looking at either, right? So what's the only thing that's left? It's a response bias. And so the response bias, obviously, and again, if you said non-response, you're kind of probably getting to the issue, but what's the problem here? If you actually had killed someone, do you think people would answer it truthfully? Probably not. So people would probably lie on this if they did kill someone. And unfortunately, that's a problem with some questions as well, right? They just ask too personal questions that people aren't going to answer truthfully. So what's the way to fix it? There are a couple of options. Obviously, you could ask the question differently, right? Maybe why are you asking this question? Is it because you're trying to see whether people are evil? Are you trying to see what people are capable of? Well, then ask it, maybe ask it a different way. Have you ever, lied or, something a lot less consequence based than killing someone? So maybe just, changing around the question to get a little bit more into why you're asking this. If you literally are just trying to see if people have killed anybody, maybe just don't ask it. There's no way to fix it. If you're trying to get people to admit that they killed someone, don't do that, because people probably aren't going to be truthful if they have. All right. So hopefully these gave you enough examples to be able to kind of see what we're talking about for this section. As always, if you're still a little confused, feel free to contact me. I'd love to explain more. Have a great day.